If I may, I'd just like to ask one first off the bat, is that the common thread, the universal thread on this is it's always about people that will deliver in the end. And we have a problem with workforce in terms of looking forward in the future. We have an aging workforce. The statistics there are quite alarming. And we need to do something to encourage education and bring in young, but at the same time to harness the experience of those who are on their trajectory outwards from the service and find a way that mentoring can be brought back in again. And we're working very closely on the cleaning side of things to look at the healthcare cleaning operative apprenticeship and how we can mobilize more trust into embracing that and carrying it forward to actually upskill our workforce at the very basic level of healthcare hygiene and patient safety. And I presume that that is common across all of the estates management process. So, Liam, have you? Yeah. So you're dealing with a very complex subject here and lots of disciplines to do.
Yeah, in my role, I also get to look after two ladies that run the ED&I projects for NHS England. So I know quite a lot about workforce and the demographics of the workforce. And quite right, you know, if you look at technical grades, most of our workforce are over 55, and you're right, they're on the trajectory out. And we've been talking quite a lot about how we think we can attract people into various jobs, because I think the NHS undersells itself or doesn't sell itself at all and doesn't compete properly in the marketplace. And if we're looking for, you know, one of the things that we had a long discussion about is engineers. We need some engineers, and we need them quickly, and we need them in their 20s. Because, you know, the guys who are 55, they need to bring them through so that we can operate the facilities going in the future. And the new hospitals are going to be technically more advanced than the current hospitals. So we need some really good quality people. How do we get those? Well, firstly, you know, we need to be getting into schools. Sorry, you need to be getting into schools, probably by the time that the guys in the schools are thinking about their options, to make sure they're taking science as an option, so we can get a tranche of people that might be interested in engineering and science and stuff going forwards. So there's a bit of work for us to do there. And the other thing is there's various workforce plans that are being developed that will help us balance the workforce a bit more in gender and also in ethnicity as well. So we've got some work to do there. Really interesting to look at that. And again, although it's a very complex subject, because when you look in the centre, we've got all these fabulous figures where you can say, oh, over the whole country it looks like this. But if you take ethnicity in the southwest is not the same as it is in Leicester. So, you know, where you're working, you're going to have to take into account the neighbourhood that you're working in, you know, and the area that you're working in to make sure you get the right balance of ethnicity and diversity involved in those things. It's not easy, but it's like anything else. As soon as we start to focus on something, it's amazing the changes that can be delivered.
Thank you, Lynn. I think we can extend the invitation to everybody, that everybody can become an NHS ambassador and get out into the community and share the challenges that the NHS is looking at in the future and those roles which will be critical and important to our communities going forward. So I think that, I'm not sure what the link is, but there is the NHS Ambassador Programme, which is open to all to reach out.
Thank you very much. I've got two questions for Liam. Firstly, how do you make the waste inert? Just a technical question. I'm just very, very interested to know, how would you actually treat the clinical waste to make it inert?
Okay, so excluding even yellow bag waste now, so there are technologies out there at the moment. So most waste, it's heat treated. Yeah, infectious clinical waste tends to be heat treated in autoclaves, that type of thing. But there are various other alternative technologies coming along. There's frictional technology. So basically it's a drum, put the waste in, spinning blade at the bottom, chops the waste up, and the chopping process increases the temperature and brings the temperature up. And they hold it there for 45 minutes. And that basically means that everything becomes inert. Now, I'm a bit hesitant because there are people out there who are pushing that further and are actually putting pharmaceutically contaminated waste in autoclaves, and then what they've realised is that they can steam sterilise and wash the waste, and then they basically take the condensate and they keep that, because that's where the pharmaceuticals are now, and they very cleverly, they take that and they blow that into other incinerators to control the temperatures. And the beauty of that is, again, coming back to what the EA are saying to us, just stop burning stuff, because when you've incinerated something, it's a full stop in terms of the ability to reuse that. I mean, you might be able to bury it in some concrete or something. But actually, once you've sterilised it and cleaned the waste, then there are companies out there right now who have developed methods where they can pull metals and plastics out of that. So we'll end up with a smaller fraction, which will end up maybe as an RDF, refuse-derived fuel, or an SRF, which can then go to an energy from waste plant onwards. But where we're being pushed at the moment, I think that's the direction we're going in. And one of the things that we've done in the strategy, because we've actually got a 2040 horizon, we're actually been able to give businesses multiple business cycles, 5-year business cycles, to get themselves ready for this. And I've engaged with most of the providers, and they all seem up for it, which is great news. But I think it will look very different in the future than it does now.
That's very interesting, thank you. And if I'm allowed, my second question, the training programme that you talked about, I work for an FM provider. Would it be open to my colleagues as well as people who work directly for the NHS?
Yeah, so if you need to get hold of Neil Rippon, and if you need his details afterwards, let me know. He's at the CIWM. They're looking for candidates for cohorts 3 and 4 at the moment, and this is something that they want to push. And I think so far, the first 2 cohorts are about halfway through the course, and all the feedback we've had is fantastic. It's not evidence-based, they're actually learning on the job. And I think the problem has been the first step on the ladder is the rung is really high, and we've actually shortened that step to get people on it.
Hi, I'm Julian from Clean Event Services. We do intend to recycle these leaflets after the event, but sorry panel, there's another question for you, Liam. How do we overcome the incentive for waste companies to generate energy from waste in a marketplace that has a high premium cost on electricity? How do we encourage recycling over EFW?
Yeah, I think the carbon factors that we've developed will do some of that, because anything that goes to incineration is going to have a very high carbon penalty to it. So the tendency will be to move waste down into the streams it should be. There will always be a place for incineration, because some waste, cytotoxics, cytostatics and anatomicals in particular, are mandated that they have to go for incineration. But I think we can also, don't forget, once we've pulled the recyclates out of the treated waste, we'll always end up with a fraction which can end up going for energy production.
Hello, Sarah Greenslade from the British Parking Association. Paul, I just wanted to ask you a question. I think you mentioned solar in amongst the sort of targets for trusts to be ambitious and incorporate solar. And the government recently had a consultation on permitting solar panels into car parks, as canopies, basically, which seem to fit NHS car parks nicely. How does that fit into the NHS England plans, the net zero plans?
Well, we're all for that where it works. Obviously, the problem with covering car parks with solar is the capital upfront costs and where that's going to come from. You'll all be aware that the NHS is limited in what it can spend its capital money on. There's never enough. And even if you could source that money, it counts towards the NHS's overall capital kind of limits, expenditure limits. But the technology works. You might be aware that France have now said that all public car parks in future should have solar canopies, which is great to see, and we'd be keen to follow. I think and the technology is very effective at producing electricity and could provide resilience in terms of electricity supply to hospitals to back up generators, things that they've got at the moment. Could also help to power EV chargers, although the energy that you're likely to generate from a solar panel is unlikely to be enough to power all of the EV charging the NHS might need. But really what we're looking for, I think, as the NHS is a partnership potentially with private providers who could put that capital up front to put those solar panels in place, potentially recouping their investment through a kind of revenue charge to NHS operators, and that's a win-win ultimately. So there aren't many NHS organisations that are looking at doing that in car parks, but we're keen to work with those who are keen. And there's a really good success story about putting PV panels on roofs and things, and a number of trusts have made giant strides with that. So I think there'll be an open market for that, and we'd be keen to support where we can. As I say, the real barrier would be not the technology or the willingness from the NHS. I think it will be access to capital and being permitted to spend that money out of NHS capital resources.
Hi, I'm Gary from Together Support Solutions. I have a question for Emma. With regards to the exemplar site status, the sites that have been awarded, have they been direct NHS employers or any FM companies involved in that? And if there are FM companies, have you noticed any challenges or benefits of having them as part of that process?
The two full sites are with an FM provider, and we have seen some amazing results from the working in partnership that we do both at a national level and for the sites involved. I think, the great thing is if you do have an FM provider, then it's, they've got knowledge, they can advise, and they can work alongside you to ensure you're getting the best possible service across all of your services. When we're thinking about feeding the patients, we're thinking about feeding our staff, the retail solutions, the things that they can, as a company, bring to the table can be very beneficial for a lot of organisations. That's not to say we've got a number of sites for food that are in-house sites, but generally one size doesn't fit all. So there can be great benefits if people work well and in a partnership with their FM providers where they have them.
It's a question for Liam. I'm Beth from the East of England Ambulance Service. We're hanging out together. Slightly nerdy question about carbon factors. Do we now have nationally agreed carbon factors for the disposal of offensive waste with energy recovery? Because I struggled to find anything, and I think that's important to note that obviously that is a reduction in the carbon factors.
So in the waste planning tool, which you can just dial up if you want to see me afterwards, if you type in NHS clinical waste strategy, it will take you to a page, and the waste planning tool is there. It will give you the carbon factor for that. I just want to talk for a second about the carbon factors. 3 years ago, when we started to look at this project, I went to all the service providers and asked them for the carbon factors for each of their processes and for the transport. Nobody had it. They were working on it, but nobody had it. So we went away and between ourselves and the Greener NHS team, we worked up some carbon factors which we could apply to clinical waste. The domestic waste ones were actually quite well known, but the clinical waste ones we had to derive ourselves. So we've done that. And now what's happening is the supply chain are now coming to me saying, well, actually, our process is slightly less carbon than what you're stating in the national figures. And each of those have come to us. So what we've agreed to do now is, as each of the suppliers produces those carbon factors for each of their waste streams and the vehicles that they use, we will start to create a granular calculation where we can build the carbon factors from the bottom up. And the idea of that being is that, and this is what the supply chain is saying, they would like to include those carbon calculations in any tender bids that they have going forwards, which is really cool, which is exactly what we want to happen. And I think it will be really interesting. We're going to hold the national figures that we've got at the minute and see how close we get. If it gets very close, I think it'll be magic numbers, but it'll be really interesting, I think. And certain areas, for instance, northwest and the southwest, might find the carbon factors are huge because the amount of transport's involved in it. And that will point to innovations where maybe we should look at on-site technologies.
Craig Morgan, NHS Wales. As we've come out of COVID and obviously with one supplier coming out of the waste market, Liam, how's the market as a whole now? Is it healthier now than it was before COVID, as we're trying to return to a bit more as a business as usual?
So firstly, Craig, it's great to see in person. I've never seen him on the screen like this. I think everyone's more aware than we were. So I think during COVID there was a number of things that didn't help us. For instance, we were very, very stressed in terms of the amount of waste that we were producing, but we were also doing some really bizarre things, like sending all our linen, putting all that in orange bags. Not only did that put massive pressure on the linen people, putting linen into shredders is not good for shredders. So it kept breaking the machines. So there's a lot of stress in the marketplace. One of the things that has improved is communication between the service providers and NHS England in particular, and also service providers and the waste managers. What we've found was all the people, the waste managers that were out there had really good, strong relationships with the operational teams of the service providers. They tended to fare better than the people that were sort of at arm's length. So what a surprise. You know, we need interpersonal skills to build relationships up. In terms of the capacity-wise, I don't think capacity was ever that much of an issue. If we were doing what the HTM advised us to do in the first place, it didn't. But that's something that we're going to have a look at. And I think the other thing that's changing is there's more and more offensive waste being produced, which can go to energy from waste plants, which is taking the pressure off of the pure clinical waste plants. Plus, there are energy from waste plants out there now that have other clinical codes on their licences, so they'll take pharmaceutical waste, stuff like that. So the market is moved a bit, and I think that will give us more flexibility than maybe we would have had during COVID.